Good day, scholars. We are examining part two of unit two, and we are going to cover standard number 5, creating the Constitution, SSUSH5A. This is the substandard, and it simply says, examine the strengths of the Articles of Confederation, including but not limited to the Land Ordinance of 1785, Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and their influence on westward migration, slavery, public education, and the addition of new states. The Articles of Confederation was the first plan of the government for the new United States of America. Due to its many weaknesses, it was later replaced by the Constitution. The Articles were a plan for a loose union or confederation, which would be under the authority of the Continental Congress. They were designed to be weak because the colonies didn't want a powerful central government. The Articles granted certain limited rights to Congress. They could declare war, negotiate peace, regulate foreign affairs, conduct relations with the Indians, and created plans for both settling and governing vast territory. The Articles of Confederation were successful in managing the new territories acquired through the 1783 Treaty of Paris that concluded the American Revolution. With all of the new land that the United States possessed, the Articles of Confederation provided a way to organize and settle the new land or territories. The Articles of Confederation strengths. Their strengths were to address and settle competing land claims. The Confederation Congress passed the Law Ordinance of 1785. The Law Ordinance of 1785 was significant in providing a mechanism for division of the land into 6 square miles rectangular townships. The sale of land through the system established in the Land Ordinance of 1785 was successful in generating revenue for the new United States government that was facing debt from the Revolutionary War. The land north and west of the Ohio River became the Northwest Territory. It was the first territory created outside the original 13 states. Congress passed the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. The law established the method by which new territories would be admitted to the United States. The ordinance banned slavery in the Northwest Territory, effectively making the Ohio River the boundary between free and slave regions. It also funded education and allowed for freedom of religion. All right. This is a map of the United States in 1787, so you can kind of get an idea of what areas were settled and what area were frontier areas or areas that were not quite settled as settled areas were. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 gave money for education in the Northwest Territory. It gave freedom of religion in the Northwest Territory. It outlawed slavery in the Northwest Territory and outlined the process for adding new states. The Northwest Ordinance process for becoming a state, first you had to be an unorganized territory. Then you went from being an unorganized territory to an organized territory. All right, that happened by when Congress appointed a governor. All right, and when the population went to about 5,000 adult male landowners, they would be able to elect the territorial legislature. Statehood, when population was gained, when population reached 6,000 people, the people would then be able to write a constitution and ask Congress to admit them as a state. Moving forward. Weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and Shays Rebellion. Evaluate how weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation and Daniel Shays Rebellion led to a call for a stronger central government. All right, the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederations, the Articles proved to be too weak because the central government was too limited in what it could do. The Articles gave individual states more power than the national government, which resulted in conflicts among the states that came to threaten the existence of the nation. The political weakness of the United States and its potential for collapse left it vulnerable to attack by foreign countries and convinced many influential Americans to support a constitutional convention. The many weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation include absence of an executive branch. They could not establish a common currency or money. They could not regulate trade. They had to rely on money from the colonies, which was unreliable. They could not pay war debts. They could not tax. Each state, regardless of size, only had one vote. And amendments being passed require a unanimous vote. Moving forward. All right, to pay off its war debts, Massachusetts raised taxes, which heavily affected farmers. When farmers couldn't pay the high taxes, their farms were taken. Daniel Shays, Massachusetts former captain in the Continental Army, led a short-lived rebellion against the states in protest against the taxes. Shays' rebellion showed the weakness of the Articles of Confederation and convinced the Continental Congress that a convention of the states needed to be called in order to revise them. In May 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention to revise the Articles, but decided to write an entirely new plan of government. Why the Articles failed. The Articles proved to be too weak. The central government was too limited in what it could do, as I said before. Some of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, the provisions was Congress had no power to tax. The problem was it left a weak currency and growing debt. Inability to pay army leads to threats of mutiny, of course, which is, their own people turning against them. Congress has no power to enforce treaties. So as a result, foreign countries are angry when treaties are not honored. For example, Britain keeps troops on American soil. Every state, despite size, has one vote. So populous states, or states that have more people, were not equally represented. Congress had no power to regulate commerce. So that meant trade was hindered by states imposing high tariffs on each other. So basically, they charged each other for goods and made sure when they did charge them, they made it high. Amendments required unanimous votes of states. So it made it difficult to adopt articles to changing needs. Excuse me. All right, Shays Rebellion. Explain the key feature of the Constitution, including the Great Compromise, limited government, and the 3/5 Compromise. Creating the United States Constitution. To reassure people that the new government would not be too powerful, the framers of the Constitution created a limited government with divided powers. The framers were greatly influenced by the ideas of the framed French political the famed French political thinker Charles de Montesquieu. Um, Powers were divided into two ways within the new government. First, you had federalism was instituted by the insurance of powers were divided between national and state governments. Second, separate powers in the federal government was shared between three branches. The powers of the executive branch was weakened because it shared the legislative and judicial branches. This safeguarded against abusive power, gives each branch of government a way to check and balance the power of other branches. All right, separation of powers. They created three branches of government to prevent the concentration of power and to provide for checks and balances. First, you had the legislative branch, which was made up of two houses of Congress, would make the laws. Second was the executive branch, headed by the president, would implement and enforce laws passed by Congress. And then lastly, we have judicial, and that was a system of federal courts which would interpret the laws. All right, you can see here in this illustration the divisions of the three branches of government. As you can see, the legislative branch, you see the state capitol, and then you see Congress. And Congress refers to the House of Representatives and the Senate. And then you have the White House. You have the executive branch. Of course, we know that's the president, but it also includes the vice president, secretary of the state, secretary of commerce, secretary of defense, so on and so forth, his cabinet. And lastly, we have the Supreme Court, or the judicial branch, which is comprised of the Supreme Court, federal courts, and judges and whatnot. All right, moving forward. All right, limited government. The framers of the Constitution feared misuse and abuse of power. The framers listed what powers the federal government does and does not have in the Articles of the Constitution. Limited government also appears in the Bill of Rights. Constitutional Convention. All right, we have two plans. All right, first plan that was introduced in the Continental Congress was the Virginia plan, and that was created by James Madison. This favored a large population. They wanted a strong president. They wanted representation based on the population. They wanted to count slaves as part of the population. And they wanted a bicameral legislature, which means two houses, House of Representatives and the Senate, of course. All right, the New Jersey plan was created by William Patterson. This favored a smaller population, and they wanted representation to be based on equality, two per state. They wanted an unicameral legislature, which means they wanted one house, and that one house that they wanted was the Senate. All right, then we have the Great Compromise. The compromise was essential for the Constitutional Convention to succeed in satisfying the contending viewpoints on the framework for a new government. Two plans for the government were offered. The Virginia plan, as I showed you earlier, which favored large states, and the New Jersey plans, which favored smaller states. Delegates to the Constitutional Convention settled the issue of representation in government by approving the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise helped save the Constitution by settling the dispute between slaves with larger populations and states with smaller populations. States with larger populations and states with smaller populations, by creating a legislature with two chambers, a bicameral legislature. There would be a House of Representatives in one chamber, with the representation being based off population, and the second chamber would be a Senate, which would be equal representation for all states. Three-fifth compromise, another divisive and controversial issue that confronted delegates at the Constitutional Convention was slavery. When it became clear that the states with large population might have more representation in the new government, states with larger slave populations demanded to be allowed to count their slaves as part of their population. Northern states resisted. Both states compromised and agreed to the three-fifths compromise, which allowed states to count three-fifths of their slaves when calculating the entire population. Also, to protect the practice of slavery, the three-fifth compromise also allowed states with larger numbers of slaves to continue the slave trade for 20 more years, and for northern states to return runaway slaves to their owners. As you can see, slavery played a big part in shaping our nation. And because of that, you can see that Southerners or Southern slave states gained more weight as far as their vote in the House of Representatives. And also we have to think about what that also meant for what we call the Electoral College, and that is the process of selecting presidents. Because the Electoral College votes in which each state have is dependent on its House of Representative members. And because of this three-fifths compromise and slaves being counted as three-fifths person, that gave the Southerners more of an influence on the outcome of the Electoral College, ultimately who became president of the United States of America. Moving forward. The three-fifths compromise was a solution to the slave representation issue was reached with the three-fifths compromise. Every 5 enslaved people will be counted as three-fifths of a person to be added to the state's population in helping with representation in the House of Representatives. All right, so moving forward. So as you can see, this is the three-fifths compromise. You got for every 5 person, 3 slaves were counted. All right, so a slave would basically count for every 5 white persons. One, they would take the exact same 5. Every 5 slave would count for three people in 5. So you got 5 white people or free people, and you have 3 slaves. Even though there were 5 slaves, they counted as 3. So kind of complicated, but if you're a math whiz, it's not quite. Moving forward. Constitutional Convention. In September 1787, the Confederation Congress approves the new Constitution. The task now was to convince at least 9 of the 13 states to ratify the document in order for it to take effect. All right, now we have the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. This is part D of our Standard 5, which is evaluate the major argument of the Anti-Federalists during the debate on ratification of the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the roles of Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. All right. Anti-Federalists. Before the Constitution could take effect, the states had to approve or ratify the document. As soon as the contents of the Constitution were published, a group of influential people spoke out against it. These people became known as the Anti-Federalists. Another group known as the Federalists promoted and supported ratification of the document as it had been drafted at the Constitutional Convention. The Anti-Federalists believed the national government created by the Constitution would be too powerful and would eliminate the powers of the states. The Anti-Federalists also argued that the Constitution did not describe the rights guaranteed to the states and to each citizen, and required a Bill of Rights to be added to the document. Thomas Jefferson was a leading anti-federalist. And as you can see, this is Thomas Jefferson. Moving forward. All right, the Federalists. The Federalists did not agree with that the citizens were left vulnerable by the new Constitution. They believed the government created by the Constitution was designed to protect citizens from the concentration and abuse at the federal level through the limited government structure. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, the man who created the design of the basic foundation of the new Constitution, were leading Federalists. To counter the Anti-Federalist efforts, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay wrote a series of 85 articles called the Federalist Papers. Over many months, that supported ratification of the Constitution and explained the intent behind its major provisions. The essay laid out a series of reasoned arguments designed originally to persuade the people to support ratifying the Constitution. As you can see, this is Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. James Madison being on the right and Alexander Hamilton on the left. Moving forward. Early political cartoon here is examining the ratification of the Constitution. Take a pause and take a look at it, see what you think about it. Moving forward. The Bill of Rights. This is Section E of the standard that we're Standard 5. Explain how objections to the ratification of the Constitution were addressed in the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights. To overcome the Anti-Federalist argument that the Constitution failed to include a statement of state rights and individual rights, the Federalists promised to support a Bill of Rights upon the ratification of the Constitution. Finally, the Constitution was and still remains the supreme law of the United States of America and is the living document which is governed. What it means by a living document is it is an ever-changing document, so we can always add amendments to it and use it to interpret how the Constitution and the Bill of Rights applies to our society right now as we speak. Moving forward. All right, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, drafted by James Madison, are the first 10 amendments or changes to the Constitution. They were added as a part of an agreement between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The first 8 amendments protected the rights of individuals from the federal government. The 9th Amendment states that the people have other rights not listed, The 10th Amendment states that powers not given to the federal government are reserved for or given to the state. The First Amendment. The First Amendment serves as an example how people's rights are protected from the federal government. The First Amendment lists the freedoms, freedom of religion, press, speech, to assemble, and to petition. All right, scholars, that concludes our lecture notes on Standard 5 of U.S. history of our U.S. history course. As you can see, you can contact me these ways: through email, through my work phone, my classroom phone, as well as the Remind app. Remind being the best way to contact me. If you can't contact me through Remind, I would suggest that you call my classroom phone at, not my classroom phone, my work phone, 404-491-0952. The classroom phone does work, but it goes straight to voicemail. So if you leave me a voicemail, I will check that. Just remember, all emails or calls received after 3:30 p.m. Will be answered the following day at my earliest convenience. Tutorial the following workday, excuse me, and tutorial by appointments on Wednesdays, 8 a.m. through 1:30 p.m. All right, you guys have a great day, and if nobody told you today, you're great. You can do great things, and make sure you do great things. All right, y'all take it easy, and I will see you all later.